All right, the Dallas Cowboys stink, but we don't. I am Fort Worth Star Telegram columnist Mac Engel, joined by my good friend Nick Harris for another episode of Cowboys Overtime here on StarTelegram.com. Nick Harris has joined us from the Star in Frisco after hurriedly making it up from his estate/manor after he was in Atlanta to watch, surprisingly, yet another Dallas Cowboys loss. Nick, we have a lot to talk about, but obviously let's get to the news of the day. The Dallas Cowboys are all in, and they have made a huge trade for a wide receiver that will make absolutely no difference here in 2024. Why don't you give good people who are watching a rundown of what is a total waste of time transaction?
Yeah, so the Cowboys this morning, Jerry Jones this morning on his radio show had said that they'd be looking at bringing in a wide receiver today via a trade. And shortly after his show concluded, the news broke that Dallas acquired Carolina Panthers wide receiver Jonathan Mingo and a 7th-round pick in 2025 in exchange for a 2025 4th-round pick. So we'll get into the pick swap here in a minute because I have my thoughts on that. But to start with Mingo, second-year guy out of Ole Miss, 55 career receptions, hasn't really found his stride with the Panthers. Now, that could be attributed to maybe his lack of talent or the quarterback lack of talent in Carolina. You can look at a couple of things. But if you want to look at Mingo specifically, he has had 9 career seasons playing football through high school, college, and NFL. He has had more than 900 yards in one of those seasons, and it was when he was a senior in high school. So the production is not elite by any means. So where do you look at how he can help the Cowboys? He is physical, 6'2", 220 pounds. This is a Cowboys receiving core that has been pushed around all season. It's led to Dak Prescott having to throw some of the most tight window throws in the entire NFL entering Week 10. But it's not going to be Dak Prescott moving forward. Something else we'll also get into. But talking about Mingo specifically, he's a guy that did not find his stride this season either. The Panthers drafted over him and bringing in Xavier Legette, and so he has not been able to really see the field much with both Bryce Young and with Andy Dalton at quarterback. And this is the stat that stood out to me, though. This is from Bobby Belt at 105.3 The Fan. He does a great job with these kind of nuggets. Out of 126 players with 75 targets or more over the last 2 seasons, Jonathan Mingo ranks dead last in the NFL in success rate. Dead last. And that includes running backs, tight ends, receivers,
kickers.
Exactly. And Jonathan Mingo is dead last. So he has definitely not succeeded when he's had the opportunities. He was a guy that the Cowboys really liked in the draft process, and I think this is probably just going back to then and not looking at the 2 years that has happened in between because they gave up a 4th-round pick for him, which is, again, the Panthers just traded away their wide receiver 1 a couple of weeks ago in Deontay Johnson. They got a 7th-round pick back, and they gave away a 5th-round pick. Or, excuse me, they got a 5th-round pick, and they gave away a 7th-round pick. The Cowboys just paid more for the Panthers receiver 5. So it's a little puzzling in that sense, but he was a 30 visit for the Cowboys during the draft process. They really liked him when he was here in Frisco, but now he comes back for a fresh start.
I think if the Cowboys had made this trade, let me back that up real quick. I want to thank Window Nation for sponsoring this and every other episode of Cowboys Overtime. I think, Nick, had the Cowboys made this trade, say in March, July, 1st of August, I think most people would probably say, okay, that's interesting, because I do think with Carolina, any wide receiver production has to have an enormous asterisk because Bryce Young has been the quarterback, and his evolution so far has been rocky at best. So I do think you have to look at his overall production and say, well, he's had different quarterback, and kind of Carolina's a bit of a mess. So you want to give him that out. But considering how this season has played out, considering and I'm talking about the Cowboys season, considering the rhetoric of Jerry Jones, who just can't help himself ever but to oversell anything, that this move should be met with a great deal amount of skepticism and I think a little bit of disgust, in the sense, not that they picked him up, but they gave up a 4th-round pick for this guy. And I think if you look at some of the past moves, and I'm going to take a shot at the Trey Lance trade, there is this part of me like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Um, look, the wide receiving core has been so bad. You mentioned it. They've been pushed around. Other than CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks has been hurt. Jalen Tolbert has shown some signs here and there. They drafted Brian Flournoy, who's not really done much of anything. I have a really hard time getting excited about this at all. So if you want to talk me off the ledge, feel free. But it kind of feels like you're right there with me on
Yeah.
this.
I'm with you, hand in hand with you on that ledge, Mac. I don't understand it personally, and especially giving up a 4th-round pick. Like if they had given up a 6th or a 7th, you would still even be talking about, okay, was this the right price? A 4th-round pick? I don't understand it because, like you mentioned with Trey Lance trade, they gave up a 4th-round pick in that one. A couple of years later, the Bears acquire a 6th-round pick in exchange for Justin Fields, a guy who had way more experience than Trey Lance and is the same type of style of quarterback as Trey Lance. So, I mean, you look at it on paper, they definitely overpaid for Trey Lance, and I think they did the same thing again here. You look at who they've drafted in the 4th round over the last few drafts, too. I mean, Dak Prescott's a 4th-round pick, Jake Ferguson, Tyler Biadasz. I mean, these are guys that they have had value finding in the 4th round. You come back to this last season, if they had that pick instead of Trey Lance, they could have gotten a running back. A guy like Isaac Guerendo is still there. Tyrone Tracy. These are guys who are having phenomenal rookie years. So I don't like giving up a 4th-round pick. Being there at the top of day 3 is a valuable pick in the NFL draft. And they would have been at the top of the 4th round because it looks like they're going to be in the top 10 of just about every round.
And Nick, it's a little curious because you kind of run into some problems when you evaluate what Jerry Jones says, because the guy's been in front of a microphone now for the better part of 25 years, and he's talked so much that he's virtually said every combination of words possible about football. So you can say, well, he said this, well, he said everything. But one thing he did say several years ago that felt kind of what you alluded to was the value of that 4th-round pick. And historically, not just with the Cowboys, look, they have missed on 2nd-round picks for years. But the 4th round had typically been a place where they had done pretty well. And to just throw away these picks on Trey Lance for virtually nothing. They might get a look at him now, which we'll get into here in a minute. But now they're going to give up a 4th-round pick for a wide receiver that is a question mark on top of a question mark is puzzling to me. Okay, let's get into what the disaster was on Sunday, because like it or not, they're 3-5, and this whole thing feels over. They've lost 3 straight, and they dropped their most recent game 27-21 in Atlanta. CeeDee Lamb suffers an injury that is maybe not terrible, but the big one obviously is the hamstring injury suffered to quarterback Dak Prescott, who looks like he is going to the injured reserve. Jerry Jones had said it. They really didn't want Dak Prescott running. He took off on a run, looked pretty good, actually. I think it was the longest run of the season. And considering all things being equal, he was actually having a decent game. But in one second-half throw, he stepped into it, and clearly you could see that something was wrong on that step in. He's going to come back. But, Nick, what do you make of what is now the latest injury to a player who is now – you cannot avoid it, has had a lot of them over the last 5 or 6 years?
Hey, it's draft season, Matt. It is officially draft season. Can we start writing a Travis Hunter fan fiction at this point? Is that allowed? No, I think when you look at Dak's case and the amount of not only injuries he's had over the past 4 years, but leg injuries as well. I mean, it extends far beyond the hamstring or him breaking his ankle in 2020. He had the calf issue in 2022. These have been things that have harbored him. And you go back to when he was spotted with a boot over the summer when he was vacationing in Mexico, and somebody caught him with a boot on. That tends to look at, and you see that he's not running the ball, and the amount of rushing attempts that he's had here in 2024 has significantly decreased. So you definitely look at it. I think you definitely have to, because you're starting to see that production dip with how those legs can be used for the Dallas Cowboys offense. Now, granted, he doesn't have a lot around him. He hasn't had a lot around him since the season started. He has an offensive line that is heavily depleted. He has a receiving core that cannot get open, and he has a running game that might be giving you or me a tryout here in the next couple of weeks. So Was he set up for success? Absolutely not. And
No.
he followed through with that. And I think I think with these 4 weeks or however more that he's going to have to be set out with this hamstring issue, it's just an opportunity to see what you have in Cooper Rush and or Trey Lance. Both of these guys are on expiring contracts. You figure out if Trey Lance might have enough in the tank to bring him back on a cheap deal over the next couple of years, or do you ride Cooper Rush for another couple of years? I think this is kind of their opportunity to be like, hey, all right, whoever performs better here over the next 4 weeks, you're going to be the backup for Dak Prescott for the next 2 to 3 seasons. So that's what I'm looking at. But as far as this team being a playoff team or having any sort of hope at pushing near when we get to January, I don't see that anymore. I think we are firmly headed towards 6-11, 5-12.
So you kind of mentioned, well, let me ask this one. Dak Prescott on the injured reserve. That's 4 games minimum he's out, right?
Correct. Yeah, that would take him all the way through Thanksgiving.
Okay, so he's out. Now we're looking into what you referenced is basically player evaluation for the future. Yeah, it is never the head coach's responsibility to tank it. It's always management's responsibility to give him a team that does nothing but tank. And the Cowboys aren't going to tank. They're not. Mike McCarthy's going to go for wins, and they'll win a couple games here and there because that's the nature of the NFL. But you didn't mention expiring contracts. Mike McCarthy's on an expiring contract.
Yep.
And he has the injury now, much in the same way he did his first season with the team, to say, well, the Cowboys weren't good enough to see what kind of difference he was going to make on that organization as a winner. They couldn't do it in 2020 or 19, whatever the first year was. And now, he's going to be without a starting quarterback for 4 games. They've had significant injuries with Micah Parsons and Tank Lawrence. There are excuses aplenty around here. So when we look at Mike McCarthy's future, Nick, what would you guess his chances are of signing an extension with the Cowboys and coming back for 2025?
Yeah, it's not looking great. And I think it could get to a situation, Mac, where, we look at this thing beginning of January beginning of December, middle of December. And if we're looking at a Cowboys team that is 4-10, 5-9, whatever it may be, at that point, is it a situation where Mike McCarthy goes to Jerry Jones and is like, hey, either extend me now or let me walk, because this is only going to get worse from here. So I think about those things. I even think about from the Cowboys perspective, from Jerry Jones' perspective, like, hey, okay, this season could be lost at some point. Now, I don't think Jerry Jones has come to that conclusion yet, but when and if he does, I think whenever that does happen, does he come to that decision on his own, saying like, hey, Mike, we're probably not going to bring you back. Would you rather leave now? And I wonder if it does get to that point, and then they just let Al Harris finish the season, or they let John Fossil finish the season, something like that. But
not Mike Zimmer.
It's a possibility. It's certainly a possibility. I was more so thinking about a guy who could, kind of lay down culture for the rest of the season. Okay. Al Harris is one of those guys. John Fossil has interim experience. Mike Zimmer is still getting used to a lot of people in the building. That's just my assumption. But Mike Zimmer certainly could be an option in that sense too. But I don't see a reality right now where Mike McCarthy is back in 2025.
So the only time Jerry Jones has fired a coach during the season was Wade Phillips in 2010, when that team had completely quit on him because they didn't respect him. And a big difference, and that team I think was 1-7 or 1-8 at the time they fired him. And Jerry Jones had the benefit of having the head coach in waiting right there on the sideline of Jason Garrett. So Jason was always going to be Jerry's Tom Landry. He had made that decision back in 2006-07. Well, we don't have that situation now. The one thing I've noticed with the Cowboys, they do play for McCarthy. Like they haven't quit. They really haven't quit. The Lions game was the closest thing I'd seen to a team that quit. That team against Atlanta, they didn't quit. They were outmanned and they weren't very good, but they didn't quit. Do you think they would fire him in season?
I don't think it would be a firing, quote unquote.
No.
I think it would be a mutual parting of ways if it got to a certain point in December. Just because what does McCarthy and what do the Cowboys get out of letting him finish 4 games when they are already out of playoff contention? I don't necessarily see that.
I think the only purpose, if you fire him for a couple of reasons. One, they've quit on him. I don't think they'll quit on The other one too is if you think you have your next head coach on the sideline. If you think, let's just say Al Harris, it's not going to be Zimmer, it's not going to be Fossil. Let's just say it's Al Harris, just for the sake of discussion. If you think it's Al Harris, then let him get started. Let him get started, and like culture, whatever term you want to throw in there, then do it. If not, then what's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, then it's and then it just comes down to Mike's pride. And like, Mike, do you want to ride this thing out? If you do, great. If not, totally get it. Good luck and Godspeed. But I don't know. I mean, is there a future head coach on this staff right now that you could say, let's give this guy a look for 4 weeks?
I don't believe so. I mean, Al Harris, I think, would get an interview if that time were to come, but I don't think they would go with him. I'd be shocked.
All right, last thing real quick before we go to break. A significant, non-significant development occurred on Friday and Saturday with the Cowboys, and that was veteran running back Ezekiel Elliott was basically suspended for Sunday's game in Atlanta for disciplinary reasons because he was blowing off team meetings or showing up late, because clearly Zeke is not happy with his role on the team. I think this was moronic behavior by Zeke, to be honest, who just doesn't get it, that he should be doing cartwheels over the fact that any NFL team gave him a contract in the offseason. I thought this was a terrible addition when they gave him the contract. You can't go home again. He's not the same guy. He hasn't done anything. I mean, the fact that he got 6 figures just to be an NFL player for another season, and he doesn't recognize that, tells me something's wrong in his support system. He's still on the team. I think they ought to cut him. They're not going to. But what do you make of this relationship for the next 2 months?
Yeah, it's been a messy reunion. And honestly, I think from a Cowboys fan's perspective, it's only making the image of Ezekiel Elliott a little bit worse. And it's kind of like I guess when, like an older person gets a little cranky in their later days, and you don't really remember what they were like when they were, in their golden days. That's kind of what it feels like here, and it's I think it's only going to be a more sad reality for the Cowboys and Ezekiel Elliott as the season goes on, just because he was slated to be inactive in that game against Atlanta. They wanted to throw out Dalvin Cook and Rico Dowdle and see what that looked like from a 1-2 punch perspective. Zeke didn't really take too much kind to that, and that's what led to him not being on the plane on Saturday. Talking to Mike McCarthy yesterday, and then Jerry Jones this morning on 105.3 The Fan, sounds like he will be sticking around. I'm with you, Mac. I thought whenever all this was going down on Saturday, I was like, okay, so he's going to be cut by Tuesday, and that's not been the case. There's a lot of love for Zeke in this building. Had he been in any of the other 31 buildings, I think he would be out the door right now. But fortunately for Zeke, he's going to have another chance here in this building. But habitual tardiness to meetings, missing a meeting late in the week last week after being told he would be inactive. That's what kind of led to Sunday's conclusion. But as far as looking forward, he's going to have to earn his way back onto the field.
Okay, we've got more to talk about here on Cowboys Overtime, but first a word from our friends at Window Nation.
Window Nation, the star of window replacement and proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys, can help you fill the house this season with savings. Buy 2 windows, get 2 free, and make no interest payments for 60 months, 5 full years. Fill your house for a customized authentic Dallas Cowboys jersey while supplies last. You could even help fill the Cowboys house and win tickets to a game. Visit windownation.com/Cowboys now for details. Call 866-95-NATION. Window Nation, proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys.
Thank you very much, Window Nation. Back here on StarTelegram.com for Cowboys Overtime. Nick, if you had to get one Cowboys jersey with any number you want, what number would you pick?
Oh, with any number that I want?
Any number. 00 to 99. Which one are you going to go with?
I'm a 15 guy. That's always been my number. But, why not take a 0 as well? Be the first time in franchise history.
Yeah, 0 is pretty attractive. I like number 1. I don't know who has worn number 1. I think these days I'm probably going with 17, Brandon Aubrey.
Okay.
See if I can do a little. Post Malone got Brandon Aubrey's autograph for his jersey. I think I want one of those. You kind of hit on it here earlier in the first segment. What you thought maybe the Cowboys' record could be. Ultimately, they play Philadelphia, which is playing pretty well right now. I don't know if you've seen it. I know you've seen it. running back, free agent running back, Saquon Barkley had one of the coolest moves I've ever seen in any sporting event in the Eagles win on Sunday, where he reverse jumped over a defender. I've never seen anything like that. And if you get a chance, Nick, there's a sideline angle where you can see the Eagles players and just over the reaction on the sideline. And you can see the play happen in real time and their reaction to it. These are some of the best athletes going. And their reaction was, oh my, it was just like ours. Like, I can't believe what I just saw. Philadelphia, hopefully you don't know this already. What would you guess the point spread is right now for Eagles Cowboys on Sunday at 3:30?
Now, I have been tracking it after the Dak news was official yesterday. It was at 7. If I had to guess right now, 7.5?
Yeah, you nailed it. Good. That's a good call. Eagles favored by 7.5. I quit counting how bad you and I have been at picking these games. You've mentioned it before. I really like the idea too, which was to put Trey Lance in there and see what he can do in sort of a run pass option / type deal. What do you think the chances that we're going to see Trey Lance either on Sunday or in any game over these next few weeks with Dak Prescott out?
Yeah, not a lot of people are trying to give away the plans too in depth or too extensively, but it sounds like Trey Lance is going to get onto the field this week. And it's they have packages in the offense that work for him that they installed all the way back in training camp that they used during preseason. And if you look at some of the RPO things, the read option type things that they did with Trey Lance in the preseason, we haven't seen that throughout the course of the year. So that is a Trey Lance specific package that I think they can bring back in certain situations, whether that be short yardage, goal line, red zone opportunities. I think you'll see Trey Lance. If it was me, I'd be putting him out there for 10, 15 snaps, and I would definitely be rotating him in as the game goes on, in the middle of drives, at the end of drives, beginning of drives, whatever it may be. I would be trying to maximize what I can get out of Trey Lance, but also still understanding that Cooper Rush is the best option this team has at winning.
Well, Micah Parsons is doing a yeoman's work in the podcast world. Will he play on Sunday for the first time since the Cowboys won in New York?
Yeah, it sounds like he will. Things are trending in the right direction. He will be on the practice field tomorrow, which is a great step in the right direction. He's actually a little bit further ahead than DaRon Bland, who is still going to be kind of a toss-up decision going into the week. It doesn't look like the Cowboys have handled bringing him off the IR correctly, because if they did, he would have been active for the Atlanta game on Sunday. So at this point, he is taking up a roster spot until they can get him back onto the field. But he has a better chance to go than he did last week, talking about DaRon Bland. But Micah Parsons specifically, it's looking like he's going to return.
Okay, let's make the prediction now before we get into some quick college talk. Eagles by 7.5. We both think Philadelphia is going to win. Will the Eagles cover? That's a huge spread. Will the Eagles cover 7.5 against the Cowboys?
I think even if Dak Prescott was playing, I'd be taking Philadelphia with this spread. The rushing attack with Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, I think it's just too much. But however, if you're a Cowboys fan out there and you're still looking for optimism and you still want to beat the division rival Eagles, I got 2 points for you. Number one, with Nick Sirianni as head coach, you always have a chance because he's always going to try to lose the game late. You look at that game against Jacksonville; they were up 3 scores late. Unreal, but there was one specific sequence. They were up by 8, 4.5 minutes to go. They're at the 33-yard line, 4th and 3, and he decides to go for it.
I couldn't believe it.
Gone up by 2 possessions and ended the game. But Nick Sirianni will let you get back into a ball game at the very last moment every single week. So that's 1 point. 2 points. In that game against the Jaguars in Week 9, it was the first time all season that the Eagles have scored points in the first quarter. So if the Cowboys can get out to a good start, who knows? Maybe they'll be able to ride that throughout the game. So 2 points of confidence. That's all I got for you, though.
You need to talk about Nick Sirianni, and it's really tough when a coach gets you to a Super Bowl. And that Eagles team, and they damn near beat Kansas City.
Yeah.
I was watching that game and watching him trying so hard to be the smartest guy in the room and, win the game and all this other stuff. And they're on the other sideline, to me, is what I thought is a pretty good NFL head coach and Doug Peterson. And I think, I know Jacksonville's not having a great year this year, but as the Cowboys sort of evaluate potential head coaching candidates, I'll be interested what kind of path they go down. I don't think we're going to see Lincoln Riley on the sidelines in a pro NFL head coaching spot anytime soon. I know that was kind of a point of conversation for a while. The one to me, and I know I wrote about it today, that will be a fascinating storyline to follow is what happens with Bill Belichick. And I think two things really are working against Belichick in his future, specifically to return to the sidelines. Number one is his age. He'll be 73 next year. That would make him the oldest NFL head coach by 6 years over Andy Reid in Kansas City. And there's all this talk that Andy's going to retire. Andy's not going to retire with Patrick Mahomes killing it right now. He's not that dumb. The one that I'm looking at is Mike Vrabel. I know Mike Vrabel wanted this job. Now, that doesn't make him unique. In all the years I've been around covering the Cowboys, they all want the job, all of them. And they all think they can convince Jerry Jones that their way is the best way. And a lot of them can. A lot of them can. But as we sit here and evaluate potential candidates, the Doug Peterson type, and I put Vrabel in that category, as someone who I would trust a lot more than Sirianni, only because Sirianni is one of those guys that you mentioned, sometimes does things that make you say, why would you do that? And you can say whatever you want about Mike McCarthy, and he's had some of those moments, and especially when it comes to clock management, even on Sunday. And I know Bones Fossil, the special teams coach, took the fall for it because he said that fake punt attempt. I didn't hate the call. But it was more the execution of it. And when you see plays like that, Nick, I mean, and I'm going to put you in a weird spot. Do you think McCarthy, if they don't bring him back, who are they going to find that's any better?
It's a good question, and something I also want to bounce off your head as far as what you just said right there. Is the Cowboys' job attractive to other head coaches now, these days? Because from the outside looking in, you could see it and be like, okay, Jerry Jones has all this control. Mike McCarthy came out last week and said running back by committee is not the preference. Well, you're the head coach. Why is that not being changed? So you would have to assume that there's a lot of oversight from Jones and co. as far as what happens on the field. Would you say it's as attractive as a job as, let's say, if Jacksonville opens up? You have a young quarterback, you have weapons there, you have a defense that has a pulse, you have a number 1 overall pick on your defensive line. I mean, at the end of the day, like where does the difference kind of come into play there?
That's a good question, because I think they're two different questions. Is the Dallas Cowboys roster attractive as, say, other teams that might be open in the offseason? Let's say Jacksonville. I think you nailed it. I think Jacksonville is going to be more attractive. I'm trying to think of other teams that might be open. The Giants. I'd be very surprised if Brian Daboll makes it another year, even though it's really more of a Daniel. That's a roster issue, right?
It is. That's a GM issue.
The Raiders, the Saints are obviously open with Dennis Allen being fired again. Other teams, I think though, when you look at the Cowboys roster, this is a team that went 12-5 3 straight years. And one thing that frustrates me when I hear Stephen Jones or Jerry Jones talk about this team is, well, they went 12-5, same team. It's not the same team. It's not. You let a lot of those guys go. And maybe they weren't world beaters, but they were starters from a team that went 12-5. And you replace them with players who aren't as good. Yeah. They're just not. So I think from a roster standpoint, and especially now with the quarterback, I'm sorry, I like the guy a lot, and I think he's really good, but those injuries are injuries. And you're on the wrong side of 30. You mentioned those are a lot of leg injuries. I think that would be a concern for any potential head coach. I do. But I think in terms of a roster, do you think this is just the roster? Do you think this is an attractive job?
I think it is from a roster perspective, and also the fact that they will have 9 draft picks going into next year, and a couple of comp picks near the top. So it's an opportunity to reload what they have lost over the course of the last 12 months. But yeah, I think it's an attractive roster at the end of the day. I mean, you look at the all pros that will be here next year. Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, DeRon Bland, Tyler Smith. I mean, they still have talent on both sides of the ball, Trayvon Diggs. But I think it's tough to see that, and it's tough to do your job when there's an oversight. And I think at the end of the day, if I'm a head coach and I go, hey, I can go to this small market and do what I want, or I can go to this ginormous market who, everybody will be talking about me every day, but I don't have 100% control over what I have, or maybe even 80% control. I'm going to the other option.
The one thing I learned a lot about when I was in your position covering the Cowboys when Bill Parcells was the head coach was a couple different things. One, Jerry's not a dumb guy. This idea Jerry's an idiot or whatever, it's just not true. He runs his mouth a lot, but the one thing that Jerry does that drove his head coaches crazy is that he would go on the radio and just say a bunch of stuff. And in Jerry's mind, it does nothing. That's in Jerry's mind. In his mind, all that talk is just sales pitch stuff. Well, to a head coach, they don't agree with it. But the one thing that was attractive to Bill Parcells at the time was the Cowboys were the big room. That was the big room in Vegas. And that's what drew. He didn't want to live here. Bill's an East Coast guy. He wanted to live in South Florida or New York. That's it. But he wanted to coach the Cowboys because they're the Dallas Cowboys. And the Dallas Cowboys matter. They matter. All those small market teams that you mentioned, that's great. But the Cowboys matter. And any coach with an ego, and they've all got one, will sit there and say, I think if I get in that room, we can do it. And you have to believe that. You have to believe that. The one thing I've consistently seen with McCarthy, with Garrett, with Parcells, in contrast to Wade Phillips, is if Jerry respects you, he's going to let you be the head coach of the team and basically shape the roster in your vision. Look at the Cowboys now under McCarthy. That looks like the McCarthy teams in Green Bay. Jason Garrett had his own vision. They played to it. Bill had his own vision for Bill guys. Wade didn't. Wade yielded to whatever Jerry's whims were. And you can just look at the draft classes. Well, this guy. There wasn't a rhyme or reason. And the Cowboys under these other head coaches have rhyme or reasons. And give Will McClay and his staff a lot of credit. Will especially. They've drafted pretty well. They've been pretty good. So I think the Cowboys are always attractive because they're the Cowboys. The frustrating part for the coach, in as much power as he may think he has, is that you never know what's going to happen. Could happen on Wednesday, could happen in August, could happen in December, could happen at draft time. Jerry will remind you, I'm running this team.
Yeah.
And if we want Greg Hardy, I'm signing Greg Hardy. And if I can think of a bunch of those guys. We want Pac-Man Jones. Well, Wade didn't care. We're like, well, okay, whatever. You're blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But, I do think, to your point about the roster, I think you make great observations. And even about the Cowboys, isn't an attractive job. It's one of 32 teams, and they're the Dallas Cowboys. And for a head coach who wants to be an NFL head coach, still the Cowboys.
Yeah.
And you cannot get away from the wattage and the allure of this brand. Jerry knows it. All right, last thing we're going to talk about. College football is rolling towards its first playoff poll or rankings, which will be released tonight.
It's a big night.
Around the same time, something else is going on in this country. I can't think of what it is.
Big night for the country. 12-team playoff debut.
So, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, you're going to do it on the night of the election results? Okay. Texas is probably going to get into the 12-team playoff.
Yeah.
Texas A&M now is firmly on the bubble because of getting its butt kicked at South Carolina on Saturday by like 100 points. But this brings to mind the other team in Texas that may just sneak in. I'm talking about the SMU Mustangs, who right now are rolling. 8-1, 5-0, number 13 in the nation in its first season in the ACC. They have 3 cakewalk games left. Boston College, Virginia, and Cal. Do not rule this out. Now, they'll have to play in the ACC championship game against Miami. I don't think they're going to beat Miami. Either way, this has been a great year for SMU football. The question about this is whether or not the Big 12 and ACC will get multiple teams into this first 12-team bracket. Nick, do you envision a scenario where the Mustangs are in the playoffs?
Are you talking about tonight or at the end of the season?
End of the season.
End of the season.
Tonight,
yeah.
no way tonight. End of the season.
I think there's a reality where they are at the end of the season. You look at Miami, they have kind of stumbled in a few games. You look at that game they had against Cal. They needed a late comeback to overcome a double-digit deficit. The game against Virginia Tech, I'm not convinced they won that game. So I think there's certainly a chance. You catch Clemson in Charlotte, I believe is where they play the ACC championship. You catch Clemson or Miami on a bad day, you could beat those two teams. I think if you're SMU. Kevin Henry Jennings is the truth. This is a kid that SMU has to figure out how to keep in the building over the course of this next offseason. I think they'll have a good chance at doing it. Yeah, absolutely. I think they'll have a good chance at doing it because he's a South Oak Cliff guy. A lot of Dallas guys brought him to SMU, and SMU took a chance on him. This is a kid that was committed to Missouri State going into the playoffs of his senior year, and Rhett Lashley and his staff just happened to come to a South Oak Cliff game, and they were like, hey, that quarterback's pretty good. We're going to offer him. And it turned out to work just fine for them. He ended up not only making it onto campus, but he made it to the depth chart. He cracked the 3 deep, and then now he's beat out Preston Stone for the job. And he's going to be a guy that I think SMU fans look back on in a couple of years as probably one of the better players in program history. And I understand the history that goes into that and the context that goes into that statement. I think he's going to be the truth over the next couple of years for the Mustangs. But talking about this year specifically, there is a reality where SMU sneaks in. And I would love if SMU was in Austin week 1. That would be unreal.
Oh, my God.
That
would be great. I hadn't thought of that. I think the funnier scenario would be is if SMU gets in and Texas A&M does not.
Yeah.
All right.
For error now. They have to win out.
A&M does?
Well, they could beat Texas and get into the SEC championship. And if they lose in the SEC championship, maybe they get that 12 spot as an what would that be, a 10-3 team? I think they get in under that reality, but they need to win out and get into the SEC championship.
I don't think they're going to get in, and I don't think they're going to get in, and they're going to look back on that Notre Dame game and kick themselves for another 7 months.
Yeah,
because the A&M's pretty good. I don't know if they're better than Texas. I thought that South Carolina game was going to be a problem for them. I didn't think they'd get killed. I thought they might lose 27-24, one of those close type games. I mean, the second half was ugly.
Yeah, it was.
And they do have, they promoted the quarterback, and now you're like, well, now what are you going to do? Because he didn't look great against what was a decent, not a great, but a decent South Carolina team. Certainly changed I do think that loss changed the weight of that game against Texas. But it's still going to be big. It's still going to be a lot of fun. And this has been a great year to follow all these teams. And obviously, the other Texas teams, Baylor, TCU, Tech, they're kind of just, plodding along. But certainly these other teams have been a heck of a lot of fun to watch. Nick, this is a lot of fun. Appreciate you hustling out to get to the star to do this and all your hard work. For all of your Cowboys coverage needs, Cowboys Eagles 3:30 on Sunday at AT&T Stadium. Be sure to check us out at startelegram.com. Thank you, Window Nation. See you next week.